the energy sector plans. And now for the last 5 or 10 years, I've done a lot of work on sort of resilience modeling for prioritization of investments and circular economy concepts. So that's a bit how I got into the Nexus and what the Nexus represents for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Diego. And to round us off, Hani, can you give us your intro, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I also have a kind of multinational type of experience. I studied in Egypt, I studied in England, I studied in Germany. I have projects with the United States. We worked in at least 15 Euro-Mediterranean countries. So I gained some experiences about the Nexus, but Nexus is also seen in from different angles. It depends about the level. For example, here in Germany, we are very busy with the hydropower, flood protection, riverine protection. So it's too much water. And I'm also a professor, not only here in Aachen at the University of Aachen, but I'm also a professor at the American University in Cairo. So here I deal with flood protection and hydropower systems. In Egypt, I deal with water scarcity and how we can use water for desalination, how can you use salt water with the help of renewable energy to desalinate and grow crops. So you imagine in the future, we have to see desalination also for food production. And that's one of the challenges. So two completely different areas of research and development. But to go specifically to my understanding of the Nexus, I see, when we discuss the Nexus, I see 4 different levels that we need to consider. The first level is, for me, the global level. What is the importance of the Nexus for us at the global level? I believe that the Nexus is a core mechanism for achieving the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Simply because food is directly related to SDG 2, hunger. SDG 6 is directly to water, is about water. SDG 7 is about energy. And if you take each one of them or all of them together, you find water very connected to health. Food is connected to health. Education is very connected to water. So there is no way that we can achieve the SDGs without having a clear and solid understanding of the interrelationship between these 3 very important and also severe resources or scarce resources. So at the global level, this is the way how I see it and the significance of considering them. If I take very quickly to the regional level, I normally take the example of the Nile Basin. The Nile Basin is a very clear example of how there is a resources that could be a source of conflict, but could be also a source of collaboration. There is plenty of water in the Nile Basin in the form of green water, rainfall, but we still fight for the blue part, which is less than 2% or 1% of the water available as a green water. Do we have solutions? Definitely. Why the people created the concept of virtual water if we are not applying it? Why don't we start using such concepts to understand more about the relation between water and food? So there are many opportunities that we can discuss them later. How can we deal with the Nexus at the regional level? When it comes to the national level, the country level, it's more for me about governance. How the Ministry of Water Resources will be working with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Energy. Are we going to merge these ministries together, or there is a kind of virtual platform so that they can mentally and understand and collaborate without merging everything together? At the local and the technological, and this is a big part of our research, is about the technology. What does it mean, the Nexus, when it comes to the technology? For me, it means using renewable energies, like solar energy, for technology like desalination, using hydroponics and aquaponics to produce more with less in a sustainable way. So that's how I see the Nexus. Thank you.
Hani, thank you so much. And to all the speakers, this is really exciting to dive into this. And I want this to be organized pandemonium, where I want all of you to continue to build on top of each other. And for the audience, this is about you. So if you got a specific question, throw it in the chat bar, we're going to get to it. But we're going to jump right into it. And I want to start with Nusha and everyone, but to Nusha to start this one. In the intros, I heard some aspects of we approach these problems in silos. We have many different problems, but sometimes it's just, we just have our blinders on and stay in one lane. But when we're making decisions around the water, energy, food nexus, what are driving these decisions? And as Hani just mentioned, we have a federal, global, state, local, individual level, like there's so many layers. So when we're making these decisions, what are the driving factors from economies of scales or virtual water or what are your thoughts on that?
That's actually a great question. I think our governance structure is as siloed as our educational structure that we have. So we actually put all the way we govern every one of these areas is very much focused on that topic. For example, just give you a simple example. We have spent a lot of time thinking about how we can make agriculture more using water more effectively in various areas and using it for high value crops. The problem with some of these decisions that we are making is that it has unintended consequences, which is not going to show up tomorrow. It's going to show up 150 years from now or 20 years from now. And that our decision making is very much of a short-term decision making. So we make these decisions in the short term, or policies that we make are very much focused on the short-term outcomes, but we don't necessarily put a lot of long-term perspective into that decision making process. In the example I brought up, for example, in California, we started growing orchards, and that's great because they are obviously high value crops and they can actually economically has a lot of value. So we are not wasting our water on crops that are not as valuable, for example, hay and cotton. But the problem is these kind of agricultural products require constant, they're permanent crops. You need always to water them, right? So during the drought periods, you can't just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to let my land go fallow and ride this drought wave till it lasts and then go back and grow whatever I used to grow before. And the problem with that is now you have lands that are, need to be watered at all times under any circumstances, under any conditions. And that's problematic. So that shows you this disconnect between, for example, land use and water use. And the same thing for energy. We make decisions about what kind of energy do we want and how we want to, how do we want our future energy sort of portfolio look like. Water is not part of that conversation at all. We are actually, talking about decarbonization and renewable energy portfolio and how we want to go 100% renewable. And very rarely you hear water as an element in this decision-making process. Are we investing in water as part of this transition process? Have we sit down and thought about, okay, so if we decarbonize or if we go through, if we have 100% renewables, what are the water impact of such a decision? So these disconnects actually, while short-term can help us and can look great, long-term, they can be problematic. And I think with climate change, this is becoming more and more of an issue because obviously our water system, for example, is very much built on abundance. We have enough water out there. The only thing we are lacking, as Amanda mentioned, is technology. If we just find the next big technology, we can continue on the path we are, which is not necessarily true because the reality is we are limited to the amount of water it's available to us and what we can do with it. So I think the opportunity here is very much in disrupting the way we govern and manage our resources and how we can create more interconnection at various scales, local, regional, global, and national, as Hani mentioned, and sort of try to understand how we can create this interlinks as we are managing these resources.
Nusha, I think I always agree with what you're saying, and you guys think at a very global scale. And of course, being in the commercial side, we're just looking for opportunities to do good and make money at the same time. So I kind of want to sort of talk just very briefly about water energy nexus here in a very unpopular topic, which is with hydraulic fracturing. So our company right now is, and we just press released last week, that we will, after 2 years from inception, be recycling 25 million barrels of water in the northern Delaware, which is southern New Mexico, which is about 1 billion gallons of water. And why are we doing that? Because we found an opportunity that also resulted in a commercial opportunity. So in order to frack, you've got to use a lot of water. Well, this is located in an arid, stressed area where the only water you're going to use is groundwater. There's no surface water. And so it creates a problem. So you are driven to think reuse. So when you frack, you produce a lot of water. A lot of people don't really realize that, let's just say in southern New Mexico, for every barrel of oil you produce, you're going to produce between 4 and 7 barrels of water. And that water's got soluble, non-soluble oil organics, you've got suspended and dissolved solids. So what people do is they take that water, they put it on trucks, they go dispose of it into underground formations. However, what you can do with that water, which is what we have done, is aggregate that on pipeline, take all of those trucks off the road, and then basically recycle that water and deliver it back to the industry for use. So every barrel of recycled produced water is a barrel of non-potable or fresh water that you've avoided. So a little bit of the circular economy here, but then in addition to go further with academia, with the industry, with ourselves, we're now looking at beneficial reuse. And what's that? You've got this massive quantity of new water, this produced water. And what are you going to do with it? Well, can you treat it? Because technology is not the issue. The answer is you can treat it, but can you treat it to where it can be used for irrigation? Look at what was done in Colombia with Pacific rubialis and all of that, where it can be treated for industry, where it can be treated for animals, or even as we're thinking right now, for the production of rangeland grass for carbon sequestration. So how do you break the mold? And we are doing this. We're making money. We are not being told to do it by environmental regulation, which is another of my big things that I like to push on because that drives change. But the industry has adopted it out of sheer need. So I view that as kind of a positive grassroots. We're never going to solve the world, but there in southern New Mexico, we are recycling as much water as we can, disposing as little as we can, so that the industry itself becomes more sustainable.
Amanda, that's a great example of how industry is driving innovation through finding an economic opportunity. And through what both you and Nusha talked about, I think one reoccurring theme I hear is that often we have the technology or the means to address these problems. And one thing, Amanda, you just so eloquently talked about was the aspects of reuse in the circular economy. And I know you just touched on it, but from Diego, from your perspective, I know you do a lot of work within this idea of reuse, of taking a once thought of input or once thought of resource that was considered a waste and now using it as input that's a productive input for something else. What is this concept of reuse within each aspect of water, energy, food, or Nusha, you mentioned land? What are some aspects of reuse that we can get into? And everyone feel free to chime in. And Diego, if you want to start us off.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. And indeed, you know, in much of the work that we've been doing on this, pushing much more the circularity approach in our water projects, sort of moving away, because I think that part of the problem that we have is that, you know, we are stuck in this linear thinking in the water sector, right? And mostly in the developing countries. You see now in Europe, the big push on the EU Green Deal, and you have a circular economy now policy. You know, we have all these concepts that the Europeans are pushing. In the US, you see in the West Coast some very interesting examples. But for us, it's how do you bring that into the developing countries, which where most of the challenges are, and how do you scale up? We've seen a lot of examples that are sort of ad hoc, led by a champion, right? You have a nice mayor or a politician that pushes in CTX, and then all of a sudden you get a wastewater facility in which most of the reuse can go to agriculture or to ecosystems or industries, right? But what we saw also in all of those models is that the ones that have worked best are the ones when you work with industries. Because one of the key aspects there is also profitability. How do you make this business sustainable? So we are working quite a bit on the reuse agenda, and basically we think of the reuse agenda a bit more in a bit slightly different concept. It's not only for us reuse, but it's also this concept of resource recovery from facilities. And that's important when we look at wastewater, because we have thousands of wastewater treatment facilities in the developing countries that are or not operating, or they are operating in a very low efficiency margin. So the concept that we push in our operations is, okay, you need to design out waste and pollution. And there you have to optimize your operations. You have to be much more efficient on the energy side, but also bring renewables into the equation. But also you can recover resources. So as I said before, in the reuse, you can use biosolids, right? For example, for construction, you can use biosolids to generate electricity. You can use biosolids as fertilizers. If you separate the nitrogen and the phosphorus, you have fertilizers that can go to agricultural sector, and then the income of the farmers increases because you reduce your cost of fertilizer expenses, for example. So we're trying to bring this concept of full circularity into the sector, understanding that you can also regenerate natural systems. So we're trying to see whether reuse can be used also for artificial recharge of aquifers, for example, or to restore degraded lands and watersheds, but also how to deliver this in a resilient manner, no? Diversifying supply sources of water, optimizing the use of existing infrastructure. And this not only as being a good sort of, I would say, environmental and social action, but also looking at this new approach as a business concept that can either reduce the operating cost of utilities or bring additional revenues to utilities so they become sustainable. Because in most of the countries, what we're facing is utilities that are by de facto broke, with no capacity to maintain any of these systems. So we are looking at that sort of business model as a great opportunity and a way that we can scale up a lot of this action.
Interesting. And Diego, you brought up a lot of good points on the technology side. And Hani, I'd like to hear from you while the technology is great, but the technology doesn't mean anything unless there's this governance and collaborative initiative to get this technologies and efforts implemented to find this circularity. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you also to Amanda and Diego to bringing this the dimension of the economy. I mean, that's very important when speaking of sustainability of private sector. Economy, of course, is the key pillar. On the other hand, speaking of sustainability, it's not only about the economy, but there are also two other dimensions, which are the three pillars of sustainability. As we all of us know, there is a dimension of the ecology and the society. So speaking of technologies, we have to study the impact of this type of business on the environment and on the society. Wastewater treatment is, yes, it is becoming business as usual, and it is, of course, in line with sustainability. But in some countries, there are social restrictions of using treated wastewater. So we need to consider them. We need to understand why these people are not encouraging recycling and reusing water for their food production. Because whatever culture or religious type of problems that I have to think about what Amanda is saying in the US, whether this is applicable in the Gulf countries, for example, then I try to see how can we make use of this great experience that she was describing and adapt it to the social and the way how the people they see it. That's why sustainability is about, again, the three pillars: the society, and what are the indicators we are going to use to evaluate whatever technology, Kevin, you are speaking about. to these social indicators. Are they going to fit or not? And what's about the environment? Speaking of groundwater use, is this groundwater rechargeable or non-renewable groundwater? These are the type of indicators. When we speak about wastewater treatment, are we speaking about ZLD, zero liquid discharge? There, what will happen with the byproduct? As Diego said, will we be using it as nutrients for agriculture sector, or we will be disposing like some other countries, or taking the clear example of the desalination? What's happening with the brine? The brine is disposed everywhere. I mean, globally, very rarely that you find stations speaking about ZLD or zero liquid discharge desalination station that's not disposing anything polluting the environment. So these are the questions that really we as researchers and business people, international organizations, I think we have a wonderful mix here to think how we are going to deal with this. How can we make desalination green technology? In my personal opinion, desalination as of today, it's not a green technology and it's not green process. I do my work in 12, 13 years in desalination, but I know I'm trying to make it more and more green with the team here and there, and also not only me. I mean, all the desalination researchers are trying to do similar work, but it's still, we have to admit that our technologies, not in all the cases, are green technologies, and we should be working on this direction, and again, studying the impact on the society, acceptance from the society, and studying the environmental indicators as well. Thank you.
Kevin, can I add something?
Please.
I think a couple of things that came up in this discussion we had was, one is the local solutions versus sort of centralized top-down solutions. And you notice in what Diego said and Amanda said, these are local, they're identifying local problem, identifying local opportunities, and building something around that, which I think actually is a theme for where we are going in this century. It's like trying to actually bring this bottom-up solution and somewhere to meet that top-down model that we had. And I think that's really, really important to realize. And one thing also Hani mentioned about the whole, cultural and social preferences and priorities. I think that's really, really important. And I put this in a different context, actually. We constantly talk about developed world versus developing world. And one thing that we have noticed in the developed world is we actually are realizing all the mistakes we have made in the way we built this system. The centralized systems, the efficiency of that system, the challenge with the aging infrastructure, the challenge with this whole siloed approach that we have. And the opportunity there is actually when you are sort of transferring some of these solutions to developing countries or actually underdeveloped countries, you don't want to build the same thing we had here, there. You actually do want to incorporate these local social issues and priorities into the decision-making process. You actually do want to focus on these decentralized solutions as a way of building a future. And actually, and as part of those decentralized solutions, I don't necessarily think it's just whatever technology we have in the US, we should just put it under our arms and move and go to a country and say, look, this is going to work for you. It actually, the local understanding of what has worked there, what hasn't worked there, making sure we maintain what works and not putting it aside, and actually bringing these solutions as an augmentation of those existing successful stories and building a future based on that. I think that is really important to realize. And for example, the concept between reuse and social priorities, I think between like 20 to 30% of our daily water use goes to the needs that are very personal to us: drinking, eating, showering. The rest of it is not that close to our, like watering our lawns or flushing the toilet is not something we need to have a high quality water. You can actually reuse in for those purposes. So kind of like trying to take what we have and also bring in this local understanding as part of this dissemination.
Talking about watering our lawns, I had to get up because that was actually somebody blowing leaves right outside my study window. So forgive me for that one. you know, what you said is absolutely correct. It is arrogant for us to believe that the models that we have, which have in large part failed in places, are models that we can then export to developing and even developed countries and expect them to apply. They don't. And, you know, I can just call out one, Zimbabwe right now. Zimbabwe is crippled with drought. The municipal system in Harare, 4.5 million people, is broken. They do not deliver water in that system. The pipes are broken. The water, when it can be delivered, has pathogens in it. It has failed. So the idea of a municipal system that is distributing across large distances water to its population does not work. So you do have to look at different models. And I think, Nusha, you've talked about it before, which is you have to go to where you're trying to solve a problem, because often it's the people on the ground who has great insight into how a particular problem could be solved. And so you've got to sort of listen to what they need and understand the context before you just apply a technology or a model. One size does not fit all in this challenge.
Can't shove a square peg in a circle hole. That's for sure.
Correct.
Kevin?
Diego?
Yeah, no, I want to jump in. I think on the social side, you know, when we do project preparation, we spend months on this social interactions to see, you know, what appropriate technologies could be, what is a business model that the communities endorse. You know, I've done a lot of work, for example, in Mongolia and Ulaanbaatar, which is in the peri areas of the city, which there basically is nomadic populations that are there for a few months and then they leave. And we actually realized that after a few months of talking to them that, you know, the list of technological options that they would endorse on sanitation were enormous. It was not like one or two different types of systems that you can bring to them. They would, you know, different nomadic groups were endorsing different types of technologies. So you have to be very aware of that. My second point is that understanding the concept is critical. And here, where we found a lot of the limitations is, for example, on the policy institutions and regulatory environment, on regulations that are outside of the water sector. And I think I mentioned in the past a couple of examples. In Peru, for example, we tried to use some biosolids from some treatment plants only to find a regulation after you do the retrofitting, some regulations on the health sector that declared that sludge was a hazardous waste. Or you go to, in Bolivia, we had another case of retrofitting for methane for energy production with the intention of the utilities putting the energy back into the grid, only to find a regulation that did not, in the energy sector, that did not allow for that to happen. And on the social side, for example, if you don't understand that context, I can, you know, the best example for us now is the Atotonilco wastewater treatment plant of Mexico City, 33 cubic meters per second, massive treatment plant. That treatment plant, it took 4 or 5 years to start operating because of issues downstream with the farmers that did not want the removal of nutrients, right? So you stop a plant that is $1.5 billion in cost just because you didn't do your due diligence before, right? So those are the things that we need to be much more aware of.
We got to ask the right questions at the beginning.
Exactly.
So it's amazing. We're flying through this, and I want to continue to hit on some of these big questions. But one that I was saving maybe towards the end, but I think it's just an important question that I want all of you to riff on, and it relates to the title of this discussion. But we've seen the impacts of climate change in 2020 with wildfires in the West and hurricanes in the East, and then we've been all impacted by COVID. And I think COVID has been something where you hear people saying, oh, I wish we could go back to the way it was. But I think we're all thinking, hey, how can we use this as a force multiplier and actually move ahead and exponentially go ahead to where we need to be based on lack of investment? But considering those issues, like and considering the future needs of populations and cities, what do we need to rethink from a technology standpoint, a governance standpoint, and what does the future urban city need to look like moving forward, let's say in 2050? And kind of going around the clock, but Nusha, if you want to start us off there, and everyone continue to riff on top of that.
Sure. According to the UN, actually, we expect to have 80% of the population living in urban areas by 2050, and actually 60% of those cities or communities have not yet been built, which means a huge opportunity to actually reimagine the way we build cities, right? So then goes down to what we discussed earlier as, do we really want these new cities to look like the way they used to? Do we really want to have them to not be based on donut economy or circular economy, which is much more resource focused and much less about abundance? Or do we want them to actually look like the way we look like right now and the struggles that we are facing? And I think that is the key question when we are thinking about the cities of the future. And I think you touched on it, Kevin, very nicely. Every disaster, every situation we are in, it's an opportunity to rethink the way we do things. For example, fires, while they're devastating and really sad, it is an opportunity for us to rethink, do we really want to build this city where it was and the way it was? And that goes down to developing country and developed country. And I think one thing that Diego said, which I think is very important as part of this conversation, is when you go to local communities, you actually people do not manage in silos. Local people actually do think about everything within a nexus. Like a farmer thinks about land and water and energy at the same time because they have to think that way. They need all of the above to be able to survive. So going local can help us to understand the nexus better and actually bring in some of these elements and parameters into the way we do broader decision-making, broader development. And I think that is very important as we are building these new cities. We have to actually be able to connect the local opportunities to actually some of the solutions that we have that we are bringing in. And I'm hoping future cities are not going to use as much water, would not be as much energy thirsty, would be a lot more thoughtful in food waste, which has all the energy and water footprints that we want to talk about. Like, the amount, 70% of the food in the US is wasted. You know how much water and energy goes into that? So all those conversations can happen actually at the local level as you're building this new future communities.
The tale of two cities too. And again, you guys all know that my perspective is different and not vaguely as smart as you guys and haven't thought as deeply on these issues. But to me, a tale of two cities here is, Nusha, New Orleans. That's not a city of the future. That is where we believe a city can continue to exist under sea level with sedimentation compaction. And if we just strengthen the levees, Katrina won't happen again. So straight after that disaster, which was predictable, and in fact was predicted, we have now spent $75 billion in federal aid. We have spent $45 billion in rebuilding. And it can happen again. So that's not a city of the future. That is redoing something we already did. Now that's fraught with so many issues of who has the political will? What about the human cost? And I am very sympathetic and don't know what the answer is to redoing something that you've already been shown by Mother Nature, maybe should never have been there in the first place. And then the other city I like to point to, and again, I'm not reaching any conclusions, I'm just sort of the tale of two cities here, is Masdar. So, Masdar can be controversial, but at the end of the day, funded by the Abu Dhabi government, by petrodollars, in 2008, we say we're going to do the city of the future, sustainable, renewable, zero waste, desalination. I can see Hani smiling because he most likely knows more about Masdar than I. All I've done is go there and talk to everybody, but at least trying to come up with a new model of a city, which now basically is becoming a little more, say, self-sustaining and funded by third parties, businesses coming there, it's becoming its own ecosystem. colleague of mine has just taken Rice Energy there for distributed generation to use it as their headquarters. So at least it's trying to create a city of the future that we can actually learn from and see what works and doesn't work. Hani, you've got much more to say on it than I can.
Thank you, Amanda. That's very inspiring keywords you've thrown here. I think, again, I'm going to take you to the other side of the world. I mean, when we speak about cities, I think we need to ask ourselves, where? Are you speaking about city in Egypt, or speaking about city in Dubai, or in United Arab Emirates, or in other Western country? I can see from the scientific point of view, people are speaking about off-grid houses. Off-grid houses means a house that brings or produce everything. A house that produces its own energy, a house that produces its own water, maybe from moisture, condensing air moisture, and then producing their own food. And there are some ideas, some research going in this direction. Somebody might be argue and say, but this is not bad for the corona. I mean, we were speaking about globalization and opening everything. And now I am here 5 minutes from the borders of the Netherlands. And yes, there is only €1, but now please, Germans, don't cross the borders because you have the number of corona cases are increasing. Are we really going in the other direction? Are we going in the opposite direction? Are we going to close and we produce everything inside our houses, producing everything inside our city and isolate the city, or we are going to continue the globalization in a different way? So there's one point that we need to think about it. But if I take you to the Middle East and then we think about the new city from the perspective of water, energy, food, how these people are, I'm thinking how these people are going to build a city in the middle of the desert and taking copy and paste from other countries. I personally, without offending anyone, I don't like the way Dubai is growing. I mean, that's taking picture from somewhere else, trying to do it. That's not the model for the desert. The model of a city built in the desert should be different. We have 3 wonderful S. Desert for me is not a desert in the sense that doesn't have anything. No, it has sun, it has sand, and it has seawater or salty water. And these 3 S for me are the wonderful nexus approach that we're speaking of. Sun for the energy, seawater for the desalination. And I like Amanda, and we need to collaborate together about these issues. And sand has a lot. I mean, people, when you speak about aquaponics in Egypt, hydroponics, and I say, why soilless? You have sand. Why don't you think of sandponics? So the technologies, even in these countries, should be different and should be coming from the local community and using the local resources. So city in the coming phase should be different, not only because of the corona, but also geographically should be different and adapted to the local circumstances. Thank you.
It seems often we forget to ask the question and don't necessarily consider the local context. And just to continue that discussion, Diego, if you want to give a final thought, a final perspective on those questions.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So I don't want to repeat. My concern sometimes, you know, in the developing countries, you have a very complex sort of social institutional structure, right? So I've been in China, in the sponge cities, and I've been in Dubai and all these new cities in Korea and South Korea. You have these cities that are built in a couple of years, and all of a sudden you have a closed city environment. Most of them are sort of top-down decisions, which we don't like. No? At least in Latin America, we are not used to the government saying we're going to put a new city here and it's going to be all fantastic. So I'm not so sure how we can get to that point. You know, it's very challenging because it means that we need to change a lot of behaviors, not only on the efficiency and the resource efficiency side, but also in having a much more clear view of what do we mean by sustainability and sustainability of systems, including the economics, no? This environment and the social and economics.
Diego, I want to interrupt you really quick, and I want you to answer this question, and then Amanda to follow up, because we are getting close to time.
Okay.
You have this background in economics, and Amanda, you have some of the business side. we haven't touched on the finance part and the access to funding. And I think that's a really important part. So if you can start, and then Amanda to jump on it, the aspects of the access to funding, the challenges to actually getting projects and initiatives done that address these issues. Diego, if you could touch on it for a minute, and then Amanda for a minute or two, and then I want to leave time for some.
Very, very quickly, because I was going to that part. No, I think that the main challenge that you have in water vis-a-vis energy is just that we don't pay for the price of water. We just don't pay. We don't value the resource. And I'm sorry, I'm a very basic economist, but when they taught me economics, and one of the first, the water and diamond paradox, right? We pay for that beautiful diamond ring and we value it. You can live without diamonds. You cannot live without water. But unless we change that perception and we start valuing the resource, valuing its scarcity value, putting a price that reflects, the true operation. We pay for an apple, right, in the market, but we cannot pay for water.
Yeah.
And unless you get there, in which you will manage demands, the demand for the service, you will put a price on that scarcity value, you don't have a sustainable business model. You cannot bring a lot of private sector participation. We have models, but we also have a lot of PPPs that have failed because there's no revenue stream coming in, right?
Correct. Concessions that have failed. I mean, I was excoriated 5 years ago, even longer at this point, for raising the issue of doing away with water subsidies. And you can do it in many ways, but until that commodity, and I'm going to use it in the word that water is a commodity, I absolutely acknowledge that water is a fundamental human right, but that doesn't mean because it rains, it's free. So if we think about it as a commodity, we can begin to ascribe a value to it, and you can tier price. You can give water away for free to a fundamental level, which is basic human consumption. And you can tier it up for industry or for people who have swimming pools or things like that. That's how you need to think about it. But the problem with funding is somebody who loans money expects a return. People who give money away and the NGOs are very disappointed with the long-term outlook and what's happened to their projects. Venture funds, private equity, they're looking for that technology that's going to be adopted, and will result in a commercial win. Doesn't have to be massive, but something that gives you a return. So we have flailed around with different models, the PPPs. Okay, somebody takes that and, at the end of the day, government funding, grassroots projects that work. We're looking at venture funds, PE, but unfortunately, it's got to be something that begins with people focused on paying a real value for the commodity that is being delivered: food, power, and water. As Diego said, we pay for food, we pay to keep the lights on. We don't want to pay for water.
And we pay for our phones. Like all that money we pay for our phones, which is
in Africa. You've got a guy out there who is living with no running water, no electricity, and he is standing watching his cattle with a phone in his hand.
And that's the saddest part of this whole thing. Yep. Not valuing what we have.
If you allow me, I mean, yes, I'm not really against this concept, because I know when we pay for the surface or the resource, we have to save them. But imagine that all the poor countries, they have the poor farmers who are the ones consuming most of the water, because they consume more than 70% of the resources for the agriculture activities. I asked one person, if we start to pay fees or any value for the money you are abstracting for irrigation, what will be the result? He told me, I'm losing money right now. So if we start to add to our agriculture model, which has water as one of the main inputs, charging water for it, then the output will be more expensive and he will be losing more money. I'm not saying there is no solution. Of course, there are solutions, but we need to think about these farmers who are consuming most of the water, and they will be the first to suffer because they will not be able to afford paying for such resource.
But, you know, actually, so honey, I think that you're absolutely correct. I think from the agricultural perspective, sometimes having, using water, giving water for free is, you know, that's the only way you can make the agricultural process, you know, to work, because it's not that, you know, financially, economically valuable. But again, depends on what you're growing. And that example I brought up at the beginning is actually very beautifully fits in this discussion, because when we have people who grow almonds in California, when there's no water, but they make so much money that they're willing to dig deeper wells to pay for all the energy that's required to get the water out, that model is obviously working for them. It makes sense, right? So it really depends on what you're growing. And I'm not saying that's a good idea. I actually think that's a very bad idea if you actually take out local products and crops and then replace them with things that they're not built for that environment. But I think a couple of things. One is, you know, we can value water, but we can also work with farmers to help them understand how they can become more efficient. The second thing is, water that's used for agriculture often actually ends up, you know, flowing to another location, or actually the tailwater can be used again and again. So that's another conversation to have. The third thing is what we are doing right now in California, for example. Another example for you, we just did a study. A lot of the berries that we eat in the US and in California is coming from Baja California. Built, made, and produced by desalinated water. It's cheaper because Mexico is giving them subsidies to have cheap power. But the people who are actually growing these crops, they have no access to water, no access to sanitation, no access to services. And then that means that I can eat berries that are $5 a box rather than $10 a box. You know, this is not sustainable. In the long run, it's just not sustainable. And one thing on PPPs, I just want to add to this. I think there's this new model of PPPs that's like community-based PPPs, public-private partnerships, which I think the goal of these community-based public-private partnerships is to actually engage the local community as part of building and putting together these public-private partnerships, which actually has multiple benefits. One is you have local community that's engaged in the process. It brings money to them, and actually they can incorporate some of the local knowledge and understanding into the process of design and building, which I think it can be a productive model, at least in water.
And Nusha, that's progress, because the PPP has gone from this big, magnificent global thing with the multinationals wanting to participate to really going almost to your microfinance to where it's needed with that local grassroots. It's the only way it's going to work. It means more projects, more build on build on build and incremental. It doesn't mean, it means there's no quick solution, but it is progress.
Absolutely.
Just to add one final comment regarding the farmers. Yes, there are, of course, solutions, and I do believe that part of the solution is fair trade. And fair trade is something that we support the farmer to increase his profitability. I mean, it doesn't make sense to produce 1 ton of cotton for a couple of dollars and then buy my jeans for 100 euros in Europe. So the farmer has to get portion of this to be able to pay the fees of the water or the fertilizers or the land or whatever you want to correct the system. So correcting the supply chain by fair trade and fair allocation of profits that to reach the farmer will help us to say, now you have to pay for the resources that you are consuming.
Amen. That's absolutely. Yes. And that will turn into the whole sustainable system, because then you have everybody who's benefiting and actually thinking about the system as not a profitability system, but actually how you can sustain it for a long term.
Right.
Well, everyone, this was an amazing conversation. And even at the end there, I had a hard time trying to say stop because it was such a fire conversation. Nusha, Amanda, Hani, Diego, you guys are all such amazing thought leaders and change makers in this world. And I just want to, be on behalf of myself and everyone here, thank you so much. And I know Grace will kind of lead us off here, but it was an honor and a pleasure to be here today leading this. You're all inspirations to me, and just keep fighting the good fight. And I'm so excited to see what happens next.
Thanks, Kevin.
You're
Thank
also
you, Kevin.
wonderful moderator, because you left us to jump on each other.
It's the beauty.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you all. Nice meeting you, Amanda, Hani.
Thank you guys so much. This was amazing. Right now we're gonna move to a break, but there will be a separate Zoom meeting that will remain active for anyone who wants to continue the discussion. Panelists, we more than welcome you to join. If you want to interact with some of the audience members a little bit more, there are some questions that have stacked up in our Q&A, but that conversation was so good. It was so insightful. So thank you guys so much.
Grace, is that a different link?
Yeah, I'll send it right out in the chat now. And so
okay.
you guys feel free to join. And then we're going to move on to a break and then to our next section, which is startup.
Great.
It's going to be startup pitches. So great. Thank you guys so much. That was amazing.
It was great to see everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a great discussion.
Good to see you all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
same.
See you all.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Just to let you know, Stuart is here.
Hi, Stuart. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going
You're
to.
welcome. And I just emailed Nasser a PowerPoint deck, a PDF of a PowerPoint deck that you could bring it up. Great. If not, I can just talk through it.
Great. So Nasser will be joining us here in just a second. And so just so you know, everyone can still hear you on our participants tab. A lot of them are leaving to go join the other Zoom room for the break, but for now we'll get everything situated.
Okay. So do you want me to send you the PDF, or is it fine sending to Nasser?
Nasser should be joining. Nasser, are you able to turn on your video?
But do you want me to send it to you as well?
No, I will log off, so it's okay. Hey, Quantum.
Okay.
Hey, Grace, can you send that link again?
Absolutely, yes.
It did not. So I'm going to click on it and it should take me there, or do I have to
It should
leave
take
this?
you there. If there's a password, it's water is the password.
Okay. I'm in now. Thank you.
Of course.
Hey, Grace, can you hear me?
Hey, Nasser, how are you? I
Good,
can't
good. So
see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and it actually has the exact same screen. Yeah.
Perfect.
And then will you make me the host?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me get that up and running.